Great. Thank you so much for the introduction, Quint. And thank you to IMD at UMD for having us here today. This is really exciting. I'm really excited to share with you all the project entitled Mapping Malvasia, a digital journey through Baroque Bologna. As Quint mentioned, this project stemmed from my dissertation research, which explores how the University of Bologna, Europe's oldest, shaped the city's distinctive visual culture. And I came to this topic after studying on exchange at the University of Bologna years ago. And what struck me the most about that experience was just how often my classes and my lectures met in museums and different sacred sites across the city. So when I was thinking of my fellowship project, I wanted to see if I could approximate that experience. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when teaching art history, we find ourselves always saying something along the lines of, I know it's hard to imagine, but especially from looking at this image projected on a screen, but this painting is even more incredible in person. This is what it would have looked like originally, etc. Learning about artworks in situ really is the best way to appreciate the full spectrum of the work's composition and its function in its original context. Yet, such an endeavor is impossible when teaching at US universities thousands of miles away from these original sites and artworks. So to surmount this problem, I came up with my original project, which I had tentatively titled Renaissance Devotion in 3 Dimensions, which involved shooting 360 photos and videos of Italian chapels on an Insta360 1X camera. And so the idea was that I would augment these videos and photos with high resolution images of the artworks originally located in these spaces, historical photographs and engravings of the site to show its changes over time. And then eventually I would include lectures by myself on the whole story of the chapel and the art in it. So here are just some images of that I used in developing or starting to develop a prototype last year. So this site is Bologna's Little Jerusalem complex, a miniature holy mountain, a little recreation essentially of the Holy Land in the urban space of Bologna. And the Little Jerusalem rather, comprises 2 extant churches, the Church of Santo Stefano in Bologna, which you see on the left, and then the Church of San Giovanni in Monte, which you see indicated by the rightmost arrow, which is really slender, sorry about that, on the right. And then finally, there was a now destroyed reliquary chapel in the center, the site of which is now occupied by a grocery store. So working with another graduate student in the collaboratory, we recreated in Unity, working from historical documentation from the 18th century before the site was destroyed, a recreation, a model of that reliquary chapel for inclusion in the photos and videos. And then finally on the right, you just see an example of an altarpiece that is located in situ in one of the churches that would have been really nice to have had high resolution images available to look at in the 360 photo and video. Next slide, please. So unfortunately, a project that would have been rather useful for pandemic era teaching was curtailed by said pandemic. I originally intended to travel to Italy last summer to tie up some loose ends of my dissertation research and to shoot the other chapels that I was planning to augment. Obviously that didn't happen. So I had to reimagine not only my entire dissertation, but also my digital project, and somehow find a way to finish both of those things on a very, very short timeline. So what I found myself thinking about a lot though, was one of the primary resources that I found myself turning to in the creation of the prototype. And that source is entitled The Paintings of Bologna, Le Pitture di Bologna, which was written in 1686 by the art historian Carlo Cesare Malvasia. It's an account of the city's cultural patrimony that, among other things, carefully describes the route one would take between visiting the city's palaces, churches, and great works of art. And I thought that it would be interesting and fun to map Malvasia's peregrinations through the city, especially because the structure of the text made it unclear what sort of route he was actually envisioning and why. Um, for example, understanding what Malvasia is actually describing really does require an intimate knowledge of the city's streets and alleyways. I know those streets and alleyways incredibly well, and I still found myself having to read the text with Google Maps open just to make sure that my wayfinding was accurate. So I wondered, who is this text really for? And I thought that perhaps maybe trying to map it would clarify that question for me. So I thought this would be a fruitful exercise in furthering our understanding of a challenging text, in addition to serving as eventually a helpful repository for teachers and researchers stuck stateside. Next slide, please. Great. So where I'm at currently is I am in the process of transforming Malvasia's text into a data set just using Microsoft Excel. So in addition to plotting the geographic coordinates of each site that the author indexed, I'm including images of key artworks from each of those sites and the names of the artists, architects, and patrons, when known, associated with them. That will allow me to chart the various relationships that spring from these sites. The idea is that I'll eventually transfer this data set into Omeka, and then using the Neatline plugin, which I've augmented using Map Warper to include a 1663 isometric map of the city geolocated over the modern geography of the space. Users will eventually be able to hover over and click on hotspots that, when illuminated, will include Malvasia's original text, an English translation, and all of the metadata that I listed above. So Quint and I always insist that I haven't fully abandoned my original idea. Really, this new project actually fits pretty seamlessly in with it, or perhaps vice versa. So I'll now turn things back over to Quint so he can explain just how we were thinking of enmeshing the two.
Right. Thanks, Caroline. And so, just to continue with the momentum, just very briefly, because I know the time is short, but the Omeka Neatline site that you see a screenshot of here with the hotspot, that of course is, you can interface via computer, but what about, for people who want to walk those streets, take the path, the journey that Malvasia really leads them on in the text, and the work, I should say, that Caroline's doing in this project, really, she's deconstructing the text in a very interesting way as well, and mining that for lots of meaning and relationships. So then what you start to think about is, what are the possibilities with AR, of course? And what you're seeing here is Bologna, and the three, well, one of them's, you see one red marker, but then where it says 4,372, that's another church, and then yet another church, and here they are marked out, and Santa Martino Maggiore, San Domenico, and San Petronio. There you go. And so I, knowing the geo coordinates of this and knowing the distances, I thought to myself, gosh, wouldn't it be neat to come up with a way we could sort of test, just test it on campus? So I've come up with Little Bologna. And this is the relationships here on campus, reduced at a 75% scale. So it's just a little bit smaller than Little Bologna. And I love the fact that there's a Little Jerusalem in Bologna. So maybe we've got to have a little Jerusalem on campus as well. And using this, I've just been playing around with, and yes, this is the ideal, that where you might have a sequence in space to show like the Piazza of San Domenico and then the church, even, and as you get closer, you get down to maybe a specific item of interest like the tomb. So this is the ideal. This is the result so far. I've been trying a couple different place markers, and one of the challenges for someone like me who has a PhD in art history and not one in computer science is that I'm dealing with a rather dancing markers and everything. So we have to still work on the tech, but we're getting there. And then this is just a little bit of fun thing to look back at the 360 video and start to imagine. These are screenshots to imagine, placing an object within the experience and what that might look like. So I'll stop there. This is just to say this is one of many projects, but we very much appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and look forward to hearing from everyone else. And thank you for the time.